Maya had been working at the Golden Heights Hotel for almost 3 years now. Every night she carried heavy trays through the fancy dining room on the top floor. The place was nothing like the small diner where she used to work back in her hometown. Here, everything sparkled under crystal chandeliers, and the guests wore clothes that cost more than most people made in a month. Tonight was different, though. The hotel was hosting one of those big charity events that happened every few weeks. Rich people from all over the city came to these parties. They wrote checks for thousands of dollars while sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than Maya made in a week. She had learned to move quietly between the tables, almost invisible to the wealthy crowd who barely noticed the staff. The dining room looked like something from a fairy tale. White tablecloths covered every surface and fresh flowers filled expensive vases. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved smoothly between guests, carrying plates of food that looked more like art than dinner. Maya had gotten used to this world over the years, but she still felt like she was watching a movie sometimes. She balanced another tray of appetizers on her shoulder and walked toward table 12. The guests there were talking about their vacation, homes in Europe, and their children's private schools. Maya smiled politely as she set down the small plates, but they continued their conversation as if she wasn't even there. This was normal. She had learned not to take it personally. The event tonight was raising money for music programs in schools. Ironic, Maya thought, considering how many kids like her had never gotten the chance to learn music properly. She pushed the thought away and focused on her work. Bills didn't pay themselves, and her family back home was counting on the money she sent every month. As she walked back toward the kitchen, something caught her eye. In the corner of the dining room sat a beautiful black piano. It was a baby grand, the kind she had only seen in movies and magazines. The piano bench was empty, and Maya noticed how the light from the chandelier made the polished surface gleam like dark water. She had walked past that piano hundreds of times over the past 3 years. Sometimes, during her breaks, she would sit at a nearby table and just look at it. Her fingers would move slightly, playing melodies only she could hear. The other staff members thought she was just tired, but Maya knew better. That piano called to her in a way she couldn't explain. Tonight, the piano was supposed to be the centerpiece of the evening's entertainment. Maya had overheard the event coordinator talking about hiring a famous pianist from the conservatory downtown, but something seemed wrong. The piano bench was still empty, and she could see the coordinator looking worried near the entrance. Maya continued her rounds, serving drinks and clearing plates. She listened to conversations about stock markets and business deals, art collections, and charity boards. These people lived in a completely different world from hers. They had never worried about paying rent or choosing between buying groceries and paying for medicine. But tonight, as she watched them enjoy their evening, Maya felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't felt in years. The coordinator was now talking quickly into her phone, pacing back and forth near the piano. Maya could tell something was wrong. During a quiet moment, she overheard part of the conversation. The pianist had gotten sick and couldn't make it. There would be no music tonight. Maya felt her heart skip a beat. She looked at the piano again, its black surface reflecting the warm light of the room. For just a moment, she imagined herself sitting at that bench, her hands moving across those perfect white and black keys. The thought made her chest tight with longing and fear. She shook her head and picked up another tray. Dreams were dangerous things for people like her. She had learned that lesson years ago when her family couldn't afford piano lessons, when her school didn't have a music program, when life got in the way of everything she had ever wanted. But the piano was still there, waiting silently in the corner. And Maya couldn't stop looking at it. The guests continued their conversations, unaware that their evening's entertainment had fallen through. They laughed and clinked glasses, secure in their world of certainty and privilege. Maya moved between them like a ghost, carrying their food and drinks, invisible and forgotten. Yet every time she passed that piano, something inside her grew stronger. It was a feeling she had buried long ago, when she realized that wanting something wasn't enough to make it happen. But tonight, surrounded by people who had everything they wanted, Maya felt that old dream stirring back to life. The coordinator's voice grew more desperate as she tried to find a replacement pianist. Maya watched her make call after call, each one ending in disappointment. The woman looked like she might cry as she realized that her perfect evening was about to become a disaster. Maya finished clearing another table and walked toward the kitchen. But as she passed the piano one more time, she stopped. Her hand reached out almost by itself, her fingers barely touching the smooth wood of the piano's edge. It was cool and perfect under her fingertips. For just a second, Maya closed her eyes and remembered what it felt like to play. She remembered the old keyboard in her childhood bedroom, the one she had bought at a garage sale with money from her first job. She remembered staying up late, learning songs from videos on the internet, feeling like the music was the only thing in the world that truly understood her. She opened her eyes and looked around the room. The guests were still talking and laughing, completely unaware of the drama playing out near the piano. The coordinator was still on her phone, her voice getting higher with each failed call. Maya took a deep breath and continued toward the kitchen, but the feeling stayed with her, growing stronger with each step. Something was about to change. She could feel it in the air like electricity before a storm. The piano waited in its corner, silent and patient, as if it knew that its moment was coming. The charity auction had just ended, and the room buzzed with excitement. People had bid on vacation packages to exotic places, expensive jewelry, and artwork from local galleries. The final total was announced over the microphone, over $600,000 raised for music education programs. The crowd applauded themselves, feeling good about their generous donations. Maya watched from the side of the room as the event coordinator walked to the small stage. The woman's face was pale, and Maya could see her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the microphone. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the musical entertainment that would cap off the perfect evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," the coordinator began, her voice wavering just a little. "I'm afraid I have some disappointing news. Our pianist for this evening has taken ill and won't be able to perform tonight." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. People looked at each other with confused expressions. This wasn't supposed to happen at an event like this. Everything was supposed to be perfect, planned down to the last detail. Maya felt something twist in her stomach as she watched the faces around her. These people had paid thousands of dollars to be here tonight. They expected entertainment, culture, sophistication. Instead, they were getting apologies and empty promises. The coordinator tried to make the best of it. "We'll have some lovely background music from our sound system instead," she said with a forced smile. But Maya could see that the magic of the evening was already fading. Guests were starting to check their phones and look toward the exits. Maya cleared glasses from a nearby table. She heard the conversations changing. People were talking about leaving early, about other events they needed to attend. The beautiful evening was falling apart and there was nothing anyone could do about it. But Maya couldn't stop looking at the piano. She had been carrying this secret for so long that sometimes she forgot it was there. When she was 7 years old, her second-grade teacher had noticed something special about the way Maya hummed along to songs during music class. Mrs. Rodriguez had pulled her aside after school one day and asked if she'd ever thought about learning piano. Maya remembered that conversation like it was yesterday. She had run home, bursting with excitement, and begged her parents to let her take lessons. Her mother had looked sad as she explained that piano lessons cost money they didn't have. Her father worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and pay the rent on their tiny apartment. "Maybe someday, baby," her mother had said, stroking Maya's hair. "When things get better." But things never got better. Her father got hurt at work when Maya was 10, and money became even tighter. Her little brother needed new shoes and the car needed repairs, and there were always bills that couldn't wait. Piano lessons became a distant dream, then a forgotten wish. Maya had found other ways to learn. She spent hours at the library, reading books about music theory and watching old instructional videos on the computer. When she was 12, she found a keyboard at a garage sale for $15, money she had saved from helping neighbors with their groceries. It wasn't a real piano, but it had keys that made sound when she pressed them. She taught herself everything. She learned to read music from library books. She figured out scales by listening to songs on the radio and trying to copy them. She spent every free moment with that little keyboard, playing until her fingers were sore and her eyes were tired from straining to see in the dim light of her bedroom. By the time she was in high school, Maya could play pieces that made her friends stop talking and just listen. She could hear a song once and play it back almost perfectly. Teachers told her she had a gift, but gifts didn't pay for college or help her family with their mounting bills. After graduation, Maya worked at a local diner to help support her family. She saved every penny she could, dreaming of maybe taking lessons someday when she had enough money. But her father's medical bills kept growing, and her younger brother needed help with college expenses. The piano remained a beautiful dream that felt further away each year. Now, 3 years later, Maya stood in this fancy hotel dining room, surrounded by people who had never worried about money. They bought expensive clothes without thinking twice. They donated thousands of dollars to charity without missing the money. They lived in a world where dreams weren't luxuries but expectations. And there, in the corner of their perfect world, sat the most beautiful piano Maya had ever seen. She watched as guests began gathering their things, preparing to leave the disappointing event early. The coordinator was near tears as she tried to convince people to stay for dessert and coffee. But Maya could see that the evening was over. Without music, without that special something that made these events memorable, it was just another dinner party. Maya's hands were shaking as she set down her tray. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure people could hear it. This was crazy. She was a waitress. She wasn't supposed to talk to the guests, let alone offer to perform for them. But she couldn't stop thinking about all those nights with her little keyboard, all those hours of practice that no one had ever heard. She thought about the kids who would benefit from the money raised tonight, kids like she had been with talent but no opportunities. The coordinator was standing near the piano now, looking defeated. Maya took a deep breath and walked toward her. Each step felt like a mile and her mouth was dry with fear. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible over the disappointed chatter of the crowd. The coordinator looked up, surprised to see one of the waitstaff approaching her. "Yes? Do you need something?" Maya's voice caught in her throat. This was insane. She was about to risk everything: her job, her reputation, her family's financial security, for a chance to play piano for people who might laugh at her. But she thought about that 7-year-old girl who had dreamed of making music. She thought about all the songs that had lived inside her for years, waiting for their moment to be heard. "I can play," Maya said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Piano. I can play piano." The coordinator stared at her for a moment as if she hadn't heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she forced herself to continue. "If you need someone to play tonight, I know it sounds crazy, but I can do it. I've been playing for years." The coordinator looked Maya up and down, taking in the black uniform, the tired eyes, the hands that clearly belonged to someone who worked hard for a living. Maya could practically see the thoughts racing through the woman's mind. A waitress? Playing for the sophisticated crowd? "Are you classically trained?" the coordinator asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "Self-taught," Maya admitted, her confidence wavering. "But I'm good, I promise I'm good." The coordinator glanced around the room, watching more guests head for the exits. She looked back at Maya, desperation winning over skepticism. "What would you play?" Maya's mind raced through all the pieces she knew by heart. Classical pieces, jazz standards, modern songs she had learned by ear. "Whatever you want, whatever would work for tonight." The coordinator looked at the piano, then back at Maya. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. "If this goes badly," the coordinator began. "It won't," Maya said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I promise you it won't." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as the coordinator studied her face. The woman looked around the room once more, watching wealthy guests slowly making their way toward the exits. She was clearly weighing her options. Let the evening end in disappointment or take a chance on a waitress who claimed she could save the night. "All right," the coordinator said finally, her voice tight with worry. "But if this doesn't work out—" "I understand," Maya said quickly. She understood more than the coordinator could possibly know. This wasn't just about saving one evening's entertainment. This was about every dream Maya had ever buried, every song she had played alone in her tiny apartment, every moment she had wondered what might have been. Maya looked around the dining room. Her manager was nowhere to be seen, probably in the kitchen dealing with the dinner cleanup. That was good. He would never approve of staff members stepping out of their roles like this. She thought about her job, about the steady paycheck that helped her family back home, about the medical bills and college tuition that depended on her income. But then she looked at the piano again, and all her practical concerns seemed to fade away. The coordinator walked to the microphone, her hands visibly shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." Her voice echoed through the room, causing conversations to pause and heads to turn. "We may have found a solution to our musical entertainment for this evening." Maya felt every eye in the room turned toward her. She had never felt so exposed in her entire life. These people were used to world-class performers, artists who had trained at the best schools and performed on the greatest stages. And here she was, a small-town girl in a waitress uniform about to pretend she belonged in their world. A businessman near the front frowned and whispered something to his wife. Maya caught the words, "staff member," and saw the woman's eyebrows raise in surprise. At another table, an elderly lady adjusted her glasses to get a better look at Maya, her expression curious but doubtful. Maya took a deep breath and started walking toward the piano. Each step felt like walking through deep water. Her legs felt weak and she wondered if she might actually faint before she reached the bench. She had performed before, but only for friends and family, never for strangers who expected perfection. As she moved through the room, she could hear whispered conversations starting up around her. "Who is she?" someone asked. "Is this some kind of joke?" another voice wondered. A young man in an expensive suit actually laughed out loud, though he tried to cover it with a cough when his date elbowed him. Maya kept walking. She thought about her little brother, who was studying engineering because he was practical and smart, and knew that dreams didn't pay the bills. She thought about her parents, who had worked so hard to give their children better opportunities than they'd had. She thought about the keyboard in her apartment, waiting for her to come home and play the songs that no one else ever heard. The piano seemed to grow larger as she approached it. Up close, she could see how perfect it was. Not a scratch on its glossy surface, the keys clean and bright under the chandelier light. She had never played an instrument this expensive, this well-maintained. What if it sounded different from what she was used to? What if her fingers didn't know how to make it sing? Maya reached the piano bench and paused. Behind her, the room had grown almost completely quiet. She could feel the weight of all those eyes, all those expectations. Some people were probably hoping she would succeed, curious to see what would happen. Others were likely expecting her to embarrass herself, providing an amusing story to share at their next social gathering. She sat down on the bench and adjusted its height slightly. The bench was padded with real leather, softer than any furniture in her apartment. She looked down at the keys, 88 black and white rectangles that held all the music in the world. Maya placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought about the first time she had touched a piano key, how magical that sound had seemed. She remembered learning her first complete song, the joy and pride that had filled her chest when she played it all the way through without mistakes. She thought about all the nights she had sat at her little keyboard, playing softly so she wouldn't disturb her neighbors, pouring her heart into melodies that only the walls could hear. She thought about the music that lived inside her, waiting for a moment like this. Maya opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and polite patience. They were giving her a chance, but she could tell they didn't expect much. Her hands moved to the keys and she felt the familiar coolness of the smooth surfaces under her fingertips. This was it. After all these years of dreaming and wondering, she was finally going to play for an audience that could appreciate real music. Maya chose her opening piece carefully. She wanted something that would capture their attention immediately, something beautiful enough to make them forget she was just a waitress. She decided on a piece she had been playing for years, one that always made her feel connected to something larger than herself. She pressed the first key, and the note rang out clear and perfect in the silent room. The sound was richer and more resonant than anything she had ever produced on her little keyboard at home. This was what a real piano sounded like, full and warm and alive. The second note followed, then the third. Maya felt her nervousness begin to fade as the familiar melody took shape under her fingers. This was what she knew how to do. This was who she really was, beneath the uniform and the polite smiles and the careful invisibility she wore at work. She could feel the room's energy changing as the music filled the space. Conversations stopped completely now. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to fade away as everyone focused on the woman at the piano who was creating something beautiful out of nothing. Maya lost herself in the music. Her fingers found their way across the keys with growing confidence, and she began to play not just the notes but the feelings behind them. All her years of longing, all her dreams and disappointments, all her love for the music that had sustained her through difficult times, it all poured out through her hands. The first piece flowed seamlessly into a second one, then a third. Maya played pieces she had learned from books, songs she had heard on the radio, melodies that had come to her in dreams. She played jazz and classical, modern and traditional, each piece chosen to showcase a different aspect of her musical soul. And, as she played, something magical happened. The room full of strangers began to feel like home. Maya's fingers moved across the keys like they had been born to dance on this piano. The melody that filled the room was hauntingly beautiful, a piece she had learned years ago from a scratchy video on the library computer. But now, played on this magnificent instrument, it sounded like something from another world. She had started with something gentle and familiar, testing the waters, seeing how the room would respond. But as she felt the audience settle into silence, as she sensed their attention focusing completely on her music, Maya's confidence began to bloom. She transitioned into something more complex, a classical piece that required both hands to work independently, creating layers of sound that seemed to wrap around everyone in the room. The whispers had stopped completely now. Even the staff members, who had been clearing tables, paused in their work. Drawn by the unexpected beauty flowing from the piano, Maya could feel the change in the atmosphere, the way skepticism was slowly melting into wonder. She closed her eyes and let muscle memory guide her through a piece that had taken her months to learn on her little keyboard at home. On this piano, with its perfect touch and rich resonance, the music came alive in ways she had never imagined. Each note hung in the air like a jewel, clear and brilliant and full of emotion. Maya opened her eyes and glanced at the audience. The change in their faces was remarkable. The businessman who had been checking his phone was now leaning forward, completely absorbed. The elderly woman who had looked skeptical was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. A young couple near the back had stopped their quiet conversation and were holding hands, lost in the music. Feeling braver now, Maya shifted into something more challenging. It was a piece by a famous Russian composer, full of dramatic runs and thundering chords that she had always dreamed of playing on a real piano. Her hands flew across the keys, and she could feel the power of the instrument responding to every touch, every nuance of pressure and timing. The music filled every corner of the room, bouncing off the crystal glasses and elegant walls, creating a soundscape that seemed to transport everyone present to somewhere magical. Maya played with the passion of someone who had been holding back for years, finally free to show what she could really do. As she moved into the most difficult section of the piece, Maya felt something she had never experienced before. It was as if the piano was playing itself, as if her hands were just conduits for something larger and more beautiful than she could create alone. Every note was exactly where it needed to be, every phrase building perfectly on the last. The guests were completely mesmerized now. Some had moved closer to the piano, drawn by the magnetic pull of Maya's performance. Others remained seated but had turned their chairs to face her directly, their expensive dinner forgotten as they witnessed something truly extraordinary. Maya transitioned into a jazz piece, something smoky and sophisticated that showed off a completely different side of her musical personality. Her left hand established a steady rhythm, while her right hand improvised melodies that seemed to speak directly to the soul. She had learned this style by listening to old records at the library, spending hours trying to understand how the great jazz pianists made their instruments sing. An older gentleman near the front of the room nodded appreciatively, recognizing the complex harmonies and subtle variations Maya was weaving into the familiar tune. He had clearly heard professional jazz performances before, but there was something special about Maya's interpretation, a rawness and authenticity that couldn't be taught in any school. Maya could feel tears starting to form in her eyes, but she didn't stop playing. This was the moment she had been dreaming of her entire life, the chance to share her gift with people who could truly appreciate it. Every hour spent practicing alone in her room, every sacrifice her family had made, every dream she had put on hold, it all led to this moment. She moved into a modern piece, something she had learned by watching countless videos and practicing, until her fingers cramped. It was technically demanding but emotionally accessible, the kind of music that could make anyone understand why she loved the piano so much. The melody soared and dipped, built to crescendos and fell to whispers, telling a story without words. As Maya played, she noticed that more people were gathering around the piano. Staff members from the kitchen had come out to listen, their work forgotten, as they stood captivated by the performance. Even her manager had appeared, his usual stern expression replaced by amazement. The coordinator, who had taken the chance on Maya, was standing near the stage area, tears streaming down her face. She had expected maybe a simple tune to fill the awkward silence, but instead she was witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Maya transitioned seamlessly between pieces, creating a continuous flow of music that told the story of her life. There were moments of sadness for dreams deferred, passages of hope for better times ahead, and triumphant sections that celebrated the joy of finally being heard. With each passing minute, Maya felt more confident, more alive than she had ever felt before. This was who she really was, not a waitress serving other people's dreams, but an artist with something important to share with the world. The piano responded to her touch like a trusted friend, amplifying every emotion and making her music more powerful than she had ever imagined possible. As she began what she had decided would be her final piece, Maya chose something that had special meaning for her. It was a song her grandmother used to hum while cooking, a simple melody that Maya had expanded into something complex and beautiful over the years. It represented her roots, her family, and the love that had sustained her through all the difficult times. The room was so quiet now that Maya could hear people breathing. Every person present seemed to understand that they were witnessing something rare and precious, a moment when raw talent met perfect opportunity. As the last notes of her grandmother's song faded into silence, Maya felt a peace she had never experienced before. She had done it. She had taken the biggest risk of her life, and it had transformed everything. The final note hung in the air like a prayer, beautiful and perfect and complete. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands still touching the keys, hardly believing what had just happened. For a moment, the room remained frozen in absolute silence, as if everyone was afraid to break the spell that had been cast by her music. Then, like a dam bursting, the applause began. It started with one person, then another, until the entire room erupted in thunderous appreciation. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering with an enthusiasm Maya had never seen at these formal events. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others shook their heads in amazement, still processing what they had just witnessed. Maya turned on the bench to face the crowd, and the sight nearly overwhelmed her. These wealthy, sophisticated people, the same ones who had barely noticed her existence an hour ago, were giving her a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Their faces showed genuine emotion, real appreciation for what she had shared with them. Through the applause, Maya spotted familiar faces throughout the room. There was the woman from table 6 who always ordered her salad with dressing on the side and never looked directly at Maya when she spoke. Tonight she was clapping enthusiastically, her face bright with joy. The businessman from table 12, who usually spent his entire meal on phone calls, was nodding respectfully in Maya's direction, his device nowhere to be seen. As the applause continued, an elderly man near the front of the room stepped forward. Maya recognized him. He was Dr. Peterson, one of the city's most prominent patrons of the arts. She had served him many times before, and he had never acknowledged her presence beyond a polite nod when she refilled his water glass. "My dear," Dr. Peterson said, his voice carrying clearly despite the continued clapping. "That was absolutely extraordinary. Where on earth did you study music?" The question hung in the air as the applause gradually died down. Maya felt her cheeks burn as she realized that everyone was waiting for her answer. She could lie, make up some impressive background that would make sense to these people, but after what had just happened, after being so honest through her music, she couldn't bring herself to pretend anymore. "I didn't study anywhere formal," Maya said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I taught myself. Books from the library, videos online, practice on an old keyboard I bought at a garage sale." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Self-taught? The level of skill they had just witnessed was professional quality, conservatory level. How was that possible? Dr. Peterson moved closer to the piano, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Tell us more. How long have you been playing?" Maya took a deep breath. "Since I was 7, I guess. My teacher said I had talent, but my family couldn't afford lessons, so I learned on my own." She paused, looking around at the faces watching her with rapt attention. "I've been working here for 3 years, and I watched that piano every night during my shifts. I always wondered what it would sound like." The coordinator who had given Maya her chance stepped forward, still dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I had no idea," she said softly. "When you said you could play, I thought maybe some simple background music, but this was a concert-quality performance." More people began approaching the piano area, wanting to talk to Maya, to understand how someone with such extraordinary talent had been serving their tables all this time. A well-dressed woman in her 50s extended her hand to Maya. "I'm Helen Crawford," she said warmly. "I'm on the board of the Metropolitan Music Conservatory. We need to talk." Maya shook her hand, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "I'm Maya, just Maya." "Well, just Maya," Helen said with a smile. "What you just did was remarkable. Have you ever considered pursuing music professionally?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. Professional music. That had been her childhood dream, the one she had buried under years of practical concerns and financial realities. I have a job, responsibilities. My family depends on me." Dr. Peterson rejoined the conversation. "Young lady, talent like yours doesn't come along often. There must be a way to nurture it properly." He turned to Helen. "What about the Foundation Scholarship Program?" Helen's eyes lit up. "Of course. Maya, would you be interested in auditioning for a full scholarship to the conservatory? We have programs specifically designed for exceptional students who haven't had traditional training opportunities." Maya felt dizzy. A scholarship? To a real music school? It seemed impossible, too good to be true. I don't know if I'm good enough for something like that." "Are you kidding?" called out a voice from the crowd. It was the businessman from Table 12. "I've been to concerts at Lincoln Center that weren't as moving as what you just played." Other voices joined in, all echoing the same sentiment. Maya looked around at these people who had been strangers an hour ago, but now felt like allies, supporters of a dream she had almost forgotten she still carried. Her manager appeared at the edge of the group, looking confused and slightly worried. Maya caught his eye and saw a mixture of pride and concern on his face. He was probably wondering if she was in trouble, if this spontaneous performance would cost her the job she needed so desperately. Dr. Peterson seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry about your current employment situation," he said kindly. "I happen to know the hotel owner quite well. I'm sure we can work something out that allows you to pursue your musical education while maintaining financial stability." Maya felt tears starting to flow down her cheeks. After years of believing that her dreams were impossible, that her circumstances had closed certain doors forever, here were people offering to help her walk through them. "Why? she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you want to help me? Helen took her hand gently. Because talent like yours is a gift to the world. It would be a tragedy to let it remain hidden. She looked around at the crowd of supporters that had gathered. And judging by tonight's response, I think everyone here agrees. The evening that had started as just another work shift had transformed into something magical. Maya looked around, at the faces surrounding her, people from a world she had thought she could never belong to, all united in their appreciation for her music and their desire to help her succeed. As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Maya one by one, to shake her hand, to get her contact information, to offer support for whatever came next. The coordinator handed her a business card for Helen, along with several others from music teachers, scholarship coordinators, and arts patrons who wanted to be part of Maya's journey. 3 months later, Maya walked across the stage at her conservatory audition, her family in the front row and her former customers in the audience, all there to support the waitress who had dared to dream. She had been accepted with a full scholarship, along with a stipend that allowed her to help support her family while pursuing her education. The program listed her simply as Maya Rodriguez Pianist, no longer just a waitress, but an artist who had found her voice and her place in the world. As she sat down at the audition piano, Maya smiled, remembering that magical night when she had decided to take the biggest risk of her life. The music that flowed from her fingers that day told the same story it had told that night at the hotel. A story of dreams deferred but never forgotten, of talent that refuses to stay hidden, and of the magic that happens when courage meets opportunity. Maya had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is believe in yourself enough to try, even when the odds seem impossible. That night at the Golden Heights Hotel had changed everything, proving that extraordinary moments often come disguised as ordinary choices, and that the difference between a dream and reality is sometimes just one leap of faith.